Brent Zwerneman, rock star, author, columnist. Houston Chronicle joins us on 365 Sports. So tell everybody what you've been doing, because I bother the hell out of people when it comes to segments, and sometimes I've always said, if we get you on, block my number, and I'm not joking about that. What's the project that you have been, like, knee-deep in?
I think I need to do the one y'all suggested next about Oklahoma, Texas to the SEC. That should be next. But this one was on a guy I grew up with who is a very successful businessman in the Woodlands, a guy named Mickey McDougal. He was briefly a walk-on for Tom Penders at the University of Texas in the late 80s. And he spent his life, he was able to retire from the sign business at age 53, but he spent his life helping others and also a successful businessman. And he's really the most fascinating guy I know. So I approached him about a year and a half ago. I said, man, I want to tell your story. I want to put it in book form. And lo and behold, last night I finished it, man. I'm going on very little sleep, but it's an awesome story. It's called Life is All About Assist, and should be out within the next month or so. And then we can revisit then, because it is an awesome book and a very inspiring story.
That's all.
So when is it available? I mean, it's going to be a few months, so you have to go through all the distributors.
It's going to be through Amazon, and but probably early fall. I told Mickey he hits 55. I said, right when you become a senior citizen, man, the timing's great here. But he was actually the mentor for a UT football player a couple of years ago named Jamarcus Durst, and took him kind of under his wing. And Jamarcus became a Big 12 champion for life from the University of Texas. So that was really cool. And Mickey's daughter, Brooke McDougal, was a standout golfer at TCU. She married another Big 12 champion for life from TCU, and Nate Guyton. So it's just a neat story. So I tell all those stories in the book.
Very cool.
Yeah. Brent, Texas A&M is a bit of an enigma right now, as people see it, because of their coaching change and a new attitude. And you hear things about, I remember hearing, I can't remember which offensive lineman said the difference was there's more accountability, which kind of leads you to believe of how much stress was kind of in that program. Is A&M maybe with Mike Elko a less is more kind of a vibe right now?
Yeah, I heard back in 2018 that there was more accountability when Jimbo Fisher took over for Kevin Sumlin, and when Kevin Sumlin took over for whoever he took over for, it's Mike Sharman, right? There was more accountability. So it is interesting, going to your point about Elko. He's a pretty low key guy. He's a very smart guy. It's funny, I do these Otter transcripts, and his transcripts are the cleanest I've ever seen from any coach or player over covering years. I don't know what that means, if that means it translates into wins or what have you, but I do kind of buy into the idea that there is more accountability. The guys described in detail, at SEC Media Days, his methods in the offseason for holding them accountable. And they gave very stark examples, of you get a certain amount of dings, you have to show up for every meal and check in and all these things you didn't necessarily hear about with Jimbo. And I will say that Mike Elko, they still have a lot of talent on this roster. And he inherited a very favorable schedule. Their toughest games are at home this year. So, I would guess that he should be at least 8-4, might get to 9-3. Who knows? Possibly 10-2. It depends on how quickly. I will say this: when he was defensive coordinator at Texas A&M, they were 31-14. When he was gone, when he was Duke's head coach, and there was a lot less accountability because he was a guy who kind of represented the program in a lot of ways on the discipline front. Even though he was the defensive coordinator, they were 12-13 without him. So we'll see what happens. He turned Duke around in a hurry, and certainly A&M. He inherits a much more talented roster at A&M than he did at Duke.
Is of the returning talent, is it split evenly, or is it mostly on the defensive side or on the offensive side?
I'm going to go ahead and say it's mostly on the defense, because that defensive line, as y'all well know, the late Terry Price and Elijah Robinson, and then Elko, when he was there, they recruited the heck out of the defensive line. And those guys, you're loaded with. It's funny. I used to, I've covered A&M forever, and every once in a while you would cover, hey, they signed a 5-star, Martellus Bennett or whatever. Okay, Christian Michael, 5-star. Man, there were more 5-stars in the defensive line signed in the past few years than combined that I covered in the previous 20 years. It was crazy. So they're loaded, in the front four on the defensive side of the ball. They're strong at linebacker with Torian York, from Temple, having a great true freshman season and being kind of one of the leaders of that defense. I tried to localize there a little bit for mixed in a Temple reference there, but
no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, their talent on offense. That Connor Wegman, he's a 5-star guy, but he still has to prove that. He's only started 6 games and going into his 3rd year. He had the broken foot last year. They're pretty solid at running back, with Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens, a couple of highly rated guys. But to answer your question, a really long-winded way of answering your question, they're heavier on more talented on defense than offense, at least right now.
Oh, and that's Brent. That's been there at their most successful times, save for Johnny Manziel's Heisman year. The attitude of A&M has been the wrecking crew. And that's been the heart and soul, much like Nebraska and the black shirts. Like when you look at certain teams and when they've been the most successful, they've had that attitude. Do you think Mike Elko can maybe get that back a little bit for them? Because it feels to me over the last couple of coaches, they've been trying to be somebody else instead of who they are.
Man, you nailed it. I'll put it that way because, think about the last time that they won a conference title. That was 1998. Mm-hmm. That was R.C. Slocum. The last time that they had hired a defensive-minded coach to be the head coach. So since then, you had Dennis Franchione, Mike Sherman, Kevin Sumlin, Jimbo Fisher, all offensive-minded guys, 0 conference titles. So I think there is some thought to that. Even with that idea, I've written over the not just years, decades of, referencing the wrecking crew and going back to Datwin and that group as being kind of the last true wrecking crew defense. There were shades of it with Elko. I think they finished like number 3 in the nation in rush defense a few years, in like his last year at A&M before he went to Duke. And then you started saying, okay, this is actually looking more like a wrecking crew defense. And he left, he saw a good opportunity there at Duke. I don't think he expected to be back this soon, but then again, I don't think anybody expected the wheels to just kind of roll off after he left under Jimbo, and there was just such a lack of discipline across the program. So I do think the Aggies, especially the older Aggies, the old Aggs, do appreciate the idea that they have a defensive-minded coach. And then they brought in Colin Klein from Kansas State to run the offense. And the sense I've gotten is that, as much as Mike Elko is going to say, hey, he's going to be in charge of all 3, that he is going to let Colin Klein do his work, which is what Jimbo was not capable of a year ago with Bobby Petrino. He brings in Petrino and doesn't even let Petrino use his own language in the offense. And, and it was just more the same with the offensive ineptitude with a pretty decent defense. They were pretty good overall on defense last year. So, yeah, that does excite Aggie fans that there's a defensive-minded guy in control again at Texas A&M.
I don't know how to really position this, but obviously with the SEC adding Texas and Oklahoma, kind of like the 800-pound gorilla that has entered the conference, and we can go into all the rivalry and whoever, Big Brother. If Texas A&M wins 9 games, 10 games, and I don't know if they'll win 7, but they lose to Texas, is the season a failure?
No, I would say not, because at that point you got to see where Texas is as well. Now, if Texas comes in there, which I don't think they will be, but if they're like 6-4 or whatever, it'd be 7-4, and then Texas wins, then you have to reevaluate. But I think the Longhorns are still going to be strong, and if A&M has pulled off at that point, say 9 wins, gotten to 9 wins, no, I would say it would not be a failure. Although there's going to be an awful lot of disappointment. One of the deals that they made with A&M, and y'all know this, the last game was at Kyle Field, so it stood to reason back when they renewed the rivalry, the next game was going to be in Austin. Well, one of the few bones they threw A&M in the whole deal was that, okay, y'all get to host the first game. So, ever since 2011, Texas has had bragging rights in the rivalry. So if then the Horns come back into Kyle Field in 2024 and win again, that's going to really leave a sour taste in the Aggies' mouth. But if they're at 9 wins, if they're at that point, 9-3, they're going to have to say that's a successful season under Mike Elko. But I will say Aggies don't want to look at that schedule next year, because all these advantageous home games I'm talking about, when you're talking about LSU coming in and Texas coming in, all those games are on the road next year as well.
Yeah, and obviously they got the Notre Dame game early, which will be the ticket prices for a handful of their home games with Notre Dame and then also with Texas coming into town. I saw somebody wrote that the ticket prices for the Texas game might be well over $1,000 right now. And
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's for the
100,000
tickets, too. Go ahead.
I know. I'll take the George Strait approach to that because it also depends on where those teams are. If they're both struggling along at that point, and I don't expect that at all in late November, then you're going to see those prices plummet just like you did. I ended up buying, early on when they announced George Strait at Kyle Field, the ticket prices were crazy. And I waited until the opening act was on over there.
No
Next thing you know, I got 3 tickets for me and my kids at $18 a piece. So we'll see. But yeah, right now, I'm kind of kicking myself that back when I didn't buy season tickets for this year because obviously it's shaping up as quite a home schedule. But we'll see how it is at that time because a lot of things can change between now and then as well. Although, let's go back to that whole idea, throw the records out. My dad grew up in Dime Box, and he said when he was a little kid, they'd go out on the porch and they knew where the game was that year on Thanksgiving by the way the cars were rolling, which way they were rolling on Highway 21. So I'm excited. That was the first thing, when this came out a few years ago, my first thought was, it wasn't about Sooners, Longhorns to the SEC. My first thought was, the game is back.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of a highlight for, Texans. It was my favorite 3 hours of the year, and suddenly it's going to be back on what should be an annual basis. There's no way in the world this game could be at opposing places every 4 years. That would be nuts. I mean, they've got to play it annually, but that hasn't been announced. But certainly, it seems like that's the way it's going to head.
Brent, I would think that one of the things you do to get A&M on board and not so mad about Texas coming in is make sure that they're going to benefit from it somehow and being part of a marquee rivalry again, which, and no offense to the A&M LSU rivalry or any other rivalry they had in this decade plus in the SEC, but they didn't really have one yet. I mean, it would just, and they're still singing about the Longhorns. So let's make that the rivalry.
Yeah, it's been missed. There's no doubt. And, in the A&M LSU games have been colorful and everything, but absolutely this one, I mean, they're separated by 100 miles. You've got to play it annually. And yeah, to your point, they tried to do that with Arkansas with the neutral site game and in Arlington. I always enjoyed that trip. You get up there to the Metroplex for a weekend in the fall and all those things. That's nice. But this game has been missed, so it's pretty cool that it's back. And I'm really looking forward to being up in that press box again for what was, the highlight. It's what I looked forward to all year, in terms of saying, man, I get to cover that game. Well, those of us kind of a little long in the tooth on the beat get to cover the game again.
Last thing, and Brent, great stuff, and congratulations on the book, and send me a text and we'll put it up when it does come out. But with what you're going to do next after you finally have a life again and a football season to cover, do you already start like a file where you're jotting things down for when that time comes when you write the book?
Yeah, in terms of like what the next book would be or something?
Like if you did the Texas OU SEC story as a book, whatever that happened, it could be in 5 years, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, it's a good question because I've actually took note at the time. I thought, okay, this is probably a pretty big deal. So I started taking notes very extensively at that point. And it is funny. I remember in Tom Landry's, I believe his autobiography, he thanked reporters in the forward of saying, hey, appreciate y'all writing all the stories over the years, back when, because it helped jog his memory on things and he could go back and look. And I thought that was pretty neat. I said, you know what, daily historians, that's what we are. So also part of it is the daily stories I wrote during that time, but also I took additional notes, things that I didn't put in stories, like Greg Sankey's expression when I asked him, are Texas and Oklahoma coming to the SEC, in person on Radio Row at SEC Media Days, things like that. I'll put it that way. Those will be included in the book.
Well, good luck with what's going to happen when the book is released that you just wrote. What a great story, but also great stuff with you today on A&M and the SEC and college football and more. Thanks for your time, man.
Fellas, much appreciated. Thanks for having me on.
Brent Zwerneman with the Houston Chronicle.